Breath of Fire is a game I find myself coming back to time and time again. I rented it a few times as a kid, and my friend who owned it let me borrow it for a few months. But even though I played it a lot as a kid, I only finished it once in 2019. I really enjoyed that playthrough, and since I'm in the mood to play it again, I chose it as my next game to review. Let's start with the intro that starts when you wait during the title screen. I'm sure a lot of people missed this intro because they hit start as soon as they saw the title screen, which is a shame because it's a really cool intro. Every line of the intro feels very deep and powerful. It asks a tough philosophical question that you ponder as you play, and hopefully get an answer to by the end of the game. Just from the intro, you know you're in for something special. From the intro and the beginning of the game alone, you can get a good idea of what the story is about. In the past, there was a clan called the Dragon Clan that built a mighty empire and vanished soon after. The clan was split into two factions, the Light Dragons and the Dark Dragons. Using the power of a mysterious goddess, the Dark Dragons seek to recapture the glory of days past by attempting to conquer the world. They are led by Zog, the Dark Dragon King. In their attempt to conquer the world, the Dark Dragons hunt down the remaining members of the Light Dragons. Ryu, the main protagonist, is one of the few survivors of the Light Dragons. So when you save your game, you talk to a dragon god. I thought that was a pretty cool way to tie the lore to a gameplay element. Ryu is a silent protagonist, but he talks in his sleep. It's like he's broken out of the persona he's trying to keep when he's conscious. In addition to the dragon people, Breath of Fire has many cool races, such as the winged people, that add to the lore of the game. This also helps to make the graphics more varied. Right from the title screen, Breath of Fire's graphics have a high level of polish. It looks amazing with the burning letters and the fire dragon. You also have the classic press start in TM, and during the intro video, the graphics are very effective in enhancing the text being displayed. For example, the purple space makes the deep philosophical question text sound even cooler. And just by looking at the environment without the text, we can get a hint of the lore. For example, when you see the ruins surrounded by birds and vegetation, you can understand that there was once a powerful civilization that was destroyed. Then in contrast, we see the new Dragon Empire, as if to tell us that history repeats itself. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, as I often am, but still Breath of Fire has a lot of cool details like that. And even in this intro, you can clearly see that Breath of Fire definitely has that Capcom look. All Capcom games of that era had a very distinctive color palette, and Breath of Fire is no exception. Breath of Fire even features cameos from previous Capcom games. For example, Chun-Li is in the game. Also from Street Fighter 2, there's a city of gold called Aurea with sumo statues that kind of look like E Honda. There are also several paintings in the games that clearly depict King Arthur from Ghouls and Ghosts. It seems that the people of the Breath of Fire universe are big fans of ghouls and ghosts, as King Arthur's portrait can be found on the walls of houses in almost every town in the game. The last Capcom references I found in Breath of Fire were from the Mega Man series. There's an NPC who looks like Dr. Wily from the Mega Man series. There's also a boss that looks like a robot master from Mega Man. But the Capcom references are not the only cool details this game has. This game is full of cool little details and animations. For example, the shop owners have a little animation after you check their store. They also went to the trouble of making the sprite for a destroyed city with animated smoke and all. Another impressive aspect of the graphics in Breath of Fire are the cities. In that era of gaming, it was quite common for all towns in a game to use the same sprite set. But in Breath of Fire, all the towns have a very distinctive look. One of the cities I really like is the one that is underwater. It's really beautiful with all the shades of pink and purple. It has that Atlantis look with the sirens and such. Even the interiors of the houses have a different sprite set than other cities. There's also a town full of zombies that I thought was pretty cool. That being said, I think Gant is my favorite town in the game. Its washed out colors and steampunk aesthetics give it a nice atmosphere. And I love that you can see both from inside the city and on the world map that this city is surrounded by mountains. And those mountains with windows are a nice touch. Breath of Fire really has a great variety of environments. From Dream World to Snow World to Desert World to Water World, you will visit all kinds of places you can imagine in this game. Breath of Fire also has CinemaScope cutscenes, similar to Ninja Gaiden for the NES. Even in the SNES era, we didn't see them very often, so I'm always surprised when I see them. While we are on the subject of graphics, I must also mention the battles. With its cool isometric view, Breath of Fire's battles really stand out from other JRPGs. The characters and enemies are fully animated, and some of the enemies are quite large. There's also a wide variety of battle backgrounds. The background changes even for small details like being on a bridge. Speaking of variety, even generic temporary party members like Soldier 1 and Soldier 3 have different portraits. They made an effort to give even these generic characters some individuality. It's really cool. but I still wish there was more lore attached to Soldier 1 and Soldier 3. Something that is not as varied but still looks really good is the overworld map. I like that the ground is elevated on some kind of cliff. The water crashing on the cliff looks nice, and since Breath of Fire has a day and night cycle, it's really nice to see the overworld map in different color palettes. It's a nice change of ambiance. However, the day and night cycle is not used that often as part of the gameplay. Despite some unique elements, at its core Breath of Fire is a very traditional JRPG. For example, like many JRPGs, you get to name the main character at the beginning of the game. The canon name of every main character in Breath of Fire games is Ryu. I like to use canon names when they are known, so this is the name I chose. Another aspect of Breath of Fire that is similar to other RPGs is that you can search drawers. Pretty much every single drawer in the game contains an item, even the drawer that's on fire in the first town. So searching every drawer is an important habit that you need to get used to in this game. In the destroyed town at the beginning of the game, there's still a shop that sells things. I don't think they're going to get many customers. Like most JRPGs, most towns in Breath of Fire have the typical item and equipment shops. There are also banks where you can store items. It's not something you see that often in JRPGs. Personally, I'd rather have a larger inventory limit than have access to a bank to store items. Speaking of shops, there's a fish character in your party named Gobi who's a merchant. If you have him as your first party member, you can set up a shop to sell items. It's a pretty cool system. Speaking of Gobi, for a short portion of the game, he's your only party member. This whole part is underwater. If you only use regular attacks, the fights are really hard. But because you're a fish, you can use special spells that can only be used underwater. This part of the game gets a lot easier once you figure that out, and it's really satisfying. While we're talking about the underwater part of the game, I should also mention that there is a public transportation system underwater. These kinds of details make the game feel more alive and really add to the immersion. Those little details really makes a difference in video games. Another detail of the towns that adds to the immersion is the fact that things change in the towns as you progress through the game. For example, if you go back to a town called Camlin, you will see people celebrating because you saved the town. They even made a statue of you. It makes you feel like the things you accomplished in the game were really meaningful. If I had to nitpick anything about the towns in Breath of Fire, it would be that there are many occasions where many NPCs say exactly the same thing. We talked about Gobi's ability to set up a shop. Every party member in Breath of Fire has something special that they bring to the party. For example, as in every Breath of Fire game, Ryu's ability is fishing. Fishing in Breath of Fire is like a gacha game. You just press the A button to cast and hope you get what you want. The better your bait and rod, the better your chances of catching something good. I really enjoyed finding better rods and farming monsters to get better baits. Some of the best equipment in the game is only available by fishing, making it a great incentive to get into fishing. There is only one moment in the game when fishing is mandatory, so if you don't like fishing, you can just ignore it. After you get a new character, it's really fun to go back and use your new ability to access things you couldn't before. It's also fun to see what your new character can do in combat. Let's take the example of Karn, a character you get during the course of the game. He can transform into different creatures by fusing with other characters. Those creatures have different abilities. Some of these abilities allow you to access areas that were previously inaccessible. When transformed, he is much stronger in battle. His puka form, which looks like a duck crossed with a dragon, is extremely powerful and makes the rest of the game pretty easy. Not that the game was that hard to begin with, but the fact that it kind of breaks the game isn't a bad thing. It feels really amazing to completely destroy the enemies. The only downside to using Karn's transformations is that if you want to use the abilities of the characters who fused with Karn, you have to revert back to their unfused form. This is a waste of time and MP. As you would expect from the main character, Ryu is also very powerful in battle. He can equip two types of weapons, swords and boomerangs. The swords only attack one enemy at a time, and the boomerangs attack all enemies at once. The first time you get to use the boomerang, it's really satisfying because up until that point you've been painfully killing enemies one by one. But using the boomerang is not the only thing that makes Ryu fun to use in battles. At the beginning of the game, Ryu can't use any spells, but later on he can turn into a dragon and become super powerful. You start out as a kind of baby dragon, but you can find places in the world called dragon palaces, where you can increase your dragon powers and eventually transform into a super powerful full-size dragon. All of these abilities are really needed in boss fights. Some bosses are quite challenging and will require you to use your spells and items effectively to defeat them. You level up very slowly, so it's hard to overpower them by grinding. However, because your party becomes so powerful as you progress, the game actually gets easier instead of harder. One thing that is quite useful during boss fights is the fact that all enemies have a health bar, so you can get an idea of how much HP they have left. However, with bosses, the last bit of health on the life bar takes a while to deplete, so you have to take that into account when fighting them. Another thing I like about Breath of Fire battles is that the characters that are not in your party also gain experience. This means that there is always someone close to leveling up, which makes things exciting. One thing to keep in mind is that characters level up at different rates, so you have to be patient if you want to make a character that doesn't level up fast strong. Later in the game, the random battle music changes. This is an effective way to make you feel like you've reached the next step in your adventure. If you've played other Capcom SNES games, you'll immediately recognize the distinctive Capcom sound font that Breath of Fire has. And like other Capcom SNES games, the music of Breath of Fire has amazing melodies that make it truly memorable. When you start a new game, the game hits you right out of the gate with epic music to let you know you are in for an amazing ride. Also, the overworld theme is so good that I could listen to it forever. It fills you with joy and makes you feel like you're on an adventure. And on the flip side, for the sad songs that play after destruction, you can really feel a certain sense of beauty and desolation in the song. Also, dungeon music gives you a sense of mystery that makes you want to explore. I also love that the music changes every time you enter a building. It gives you a warm, welcoming feeling. I love all the different vibes that the music gives to buildings like stores, or like inns where the nice music makes you want to stay. Not only the buildings, but many cities also have their own background music that give them their own unique atmosphere. In my opinion, it is one of the best video game soundtracks ever made. And let's not forget the great sound effects. Like the sound of walking on skeleton bones, they really add to the atmosphere of the game. As you can see, Breath of Fire is a very traditional JRPG with that Capcom touch that really gives it its charm. It has beautiful graphics, legendary music, and is filled with cool Capcom references. The variety of your character's abilities keeps the game from getting boring. This was my third time playing this game from start to finish, and I really enjoyed it. If you're a fan of Capcom, Breath of Fire is an absolute must-play. And even if you're not a Capcom fan, this game is definitely worth playing. This concludes my review of Breath of Fire. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.